Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us on eGroup's monthly webinar series, where today we will be discussing innovative shift to cloud computing for enterprise-style businesses. For those of you new to the monthly webinar series, we are eGroup, the comprehensive IT solutions provider that has been in business since 1999. Our focus is delivering speed and certainty to the data center and cloud. To be able to deliver these results, it's important to find great partners that we can help our customers with to achieve a level of success necessary to make them competitive in their respective sector. Before we get started, if you have any questions during the webinar today, feel free to ask them in the chat box below on the right side panel, and we'll answer any and all questions at the end of the webinar. We're happy to be joined today by Alton Levesque, eGroup's Enterprise Solutions Consultant. Alton currently lives in Wilmington, South Carolina, where he spends most of his free time out on the water, fishing and soaking up the beautiful Carolina coast. Before joining eGroup, Alton was a strategic director of IT for a Fortune 500 company, helping direct the organization towards proper innovative change. Today, Alton will be speaking about his experiences and where he sees the industry headed for enterprise businesses. So with that, I'd like to pass the torch over to Alton.
Thank you very much, Clint. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to have you here with us today, and let's go ahead and get started. So what I want to talk about is the transformation when I was a strategic leader within a major healthcare company, and the need to innovate. The pace of change was demanding. The need for us to reduce our time to market and to innovate was coming at us from all levels, all different business avenues, as well as from the CIO, and in addition to that, just trying to manage our budget and expenses and trying to keep up with the rate of change being asked of us. And so today what I want to talk about is how we achieve that goal, right, of meeting that demand of innovation, rate of change, while still providing secure, manageable infrastructure to keep pace. So we're going to talk briefly about some of the drivers and principles that triggered that change, the beginnings, what life was like before that. Some of the areas we'll explore is what do you need to do to realize the value of the change, and talk about some of the actual technical specs of the building blocks that were implemented to achieve the outcome. Some of the benefits that we saw, what was the actual tangible benefits we realized after going through this process, and then finally some of the best practices when you think about it for your own organization. So one of the things we do like to say here at eGroup is that cloud is an operational model, not a destination. And really what we're trying to communicate here is that there's an opportunity when you embrace cloud, whether it be your own private cloud, which a lot of what the conversation today will foster, or a public or hybrid, right? You have to be open to changing how you consume services, and how you manage and operate them, and bringing legacy thinking and legacy best practices to a cloud model will sometimes fall short of expectations. So that's why we like to say cloud is an operation model more than just a destination. So before when I took over the teams, everything was very siloed, meaning the organization didn't talk well to one another. Whether the server team didn't talk well to the OS team, or the OS team to the middleware team, right? Everybody just was kind of heads down, operating in their own bubble, trying to manage their own area as best they knew how. A lot of times that led to week-long processes and many handoffs. A lot of times manual, a lot of it email-based exchange, and very as far as how everybody worked together, it was very much an us-them kind of relationship. It did not have the seamless integration that we needed to be able to meet timelines. As a result of that, we ended up having a lot of ownership and troubleshooting challenges. For example, we had one particular app. It's the classic example where my application's slow. We got the teams together, and and the first thing you hear is, well, the storage is working at 5 milliseconds, or my database queries are taking longer, or the OS guys don't see any problems. And so what you end up doing is you end up getting 6, 7 people in the room from each area's disciplines. You start trying to work through the problem. You end up opening 5, 6, 7 calls with the different vendors, the storage vendor, the server vendor, the OS person, and the app vendor. Everybody's trying to send logs and updates, and it just consumes a massive amount of time to troubleshoot and to get the root cause and to get the application back into performance. And as a result of that, right, it was difficult to keep pace with technical debt. I've done a lot of infrastructure migrations and upgrades over the years, and if you ever worked specifically in 3-tier architecture with storage and SAN and servers and networking, the compatibility amongst those different layers is complex and time consuming. We would go from one, it would take us 6 months to do a storage upgrade because we'd have to upgrade the OS, or we'd have to upgrade the SAN fabric, or we'd have to which then impacted the application, and we would have to spend months churning through this and finding the right ideal alignment of different firmwares and softwares to be able to do these upgrades again. But we could never get out of that mode, because as soon as we finished it, we needed to do it all over again. And so the team was constantly stuck in this keep the lights on mode. I mean, I think Forrester came out, that 80% of people's time is being spent on maintenance, right? We're not getting out of that day to day to be able to help the business innovate, to help the business be competitive in the market, because we're just so consumed with the overhead and the burden of technical debt. And as a result of that, of course, is we had a lot of unpredictable costs as systems came to end of life. That there was a unexpected cost to upgrade. Things took longer. Again, that was really a lot of our challenge. And for a large enterprise, it became like an epidemic, right? It became very difficult to move fast, and it led to a lot of frustration. So again, it really was just kind of a cost center mindset, right? And simply, we're trying to manage costs as best as we can. We're trying to give the minimum viable product we can, while just maintaining and not really thinking about things in a more innovative, how do we do our job and how do we deliver services better? So as a result of that, as you may know today, I mean, I think everybody is experiencing digital transformation in one form or another, right? And those drivers are making security and compliance more relevant. I mean, we're seeing more and more attacks on organizations, and so obviously security and compliance and in the ability to rapidly adjust to security and cyber threats is having a huge impact. Again, businesses are asking for an earlier ROI, right? No longer is it acceptable to have multi-year projects and initiatives. They want to experience the value of their investment sooner. And there's reason for that, right? Getting innovation into the market is a competitive advantage for organizations. As a result of that, right, we really need to embrace a spirit of continuous innovation. We're seeing that in larger enterprises. We're seeing enterprise architecture teams trying to address the continuous innovation model, whether it be through a DevOps approach, whether it be through leveraging containers services and whatnot. But infrastructure also has to come up from the bottom up and meet that innovation in the middle to kind of complete that equation. Also, what we're seeing now is that the CIOs are strategic business leaders now. No longer is IT just a internal function of the organization. Due to the leverage, due to the impact of technology on remaining competitive, we now see that CIOs are being asked to be innovative, to lead innovative change, and to leverage technology to help improve the bottom line. And while yours may be different, the ones here on the right, these drivers on the right, were specific to our organization, and I think you can find parallels to whatever industry you're in. But again, as you can see from this, It's about innovation, it's about bringing technology to bear, and it's about doing it faster. Those are a lot of the drivers and a lot of the burden that's being put on the infrastructure organizations today. And so with that, you kind of have to figure out what are your guiding principles, right? When you shape your org, whether it's your infrastructure or your IT department as a whole, what principles are you looking to adopt and to make your own to as you think about solutions that align to your principles? I mean, some of these are not new. Some of these are ones we've talked about for years and been thinking about for years, such as stability and performance. I think automation is new and is something new that especially infrastructure teams and organizations as a whole are trying to embrace. But a lot of times I've seen enterprise architecture teams embracing automation, that DevOps philosophy, but really it's equally important for infrastructure teams to also take on a spirit of automation. Again, all leading into faster delivery. And lifecycle management has to be built in, right? Because of the rate of change and the elasticity that's expected from us, we know that we have to put in place processes and technology that allows us to manage life cycles in a much more non-disruptive manner. And of course, cost optimization's always been part of the IT thought process, but it's also value to cost, right? Because sometimes we're willing to make an investment that may be more because we're going to get something back. We're going to get reduced complexity. We're going to get faster delivery, or as the middle one alludes to, right, speed and certainty in the infrastructure services that we bring to our business. So it's no longer about just managing costs. It's also about managing value of those investments in our portfolio. But I think it's important that you have these principles and that you understand how they align to the drivers, and then that will help you make clearer and better decisions as you embrace this hybrid cloud world, this automated world that we're rapidly moving into. I just want to talk a little bit about the hyper-converged infrastructure and why it was so important for our transformation. Our strategy to leverage hyper-converged infrastructure began with VDI. And then we said, well, there's no sense in if all of our data center tools and stuff are on the same storage array that goes down, now we lose all of our capabilities to manage our systems. So then we evolved it to kind of putting some of our Active Directory, some of our vCenters and other components all onto our hyper-converged platform. And then we thought it was a great place to put monitoring and security to kind of keep it separate from the rest of our organization. But then as the industry improved, as all flash became a reality for hyper-converged, and as it matured, we really found that there were very few workloads that could not benefit from hyper-converged, whether that was moving large databases onto an all-flash investment, or whether that was deploying a container as a service ecosystem onto containers. We really found very few workloads that were not successful on hyper-converged infrastructure. And the big value of this and why it's important, especially if you're thinking a big portion of your infrastructure is going to remain on-prem, is that you're going to liberate that trapped time that your team is spending on lifecycle management, keep the lights on operations, the complexity of traditional three-tier infrastructure, right? And then you're going to be able, as a leader or even as an engineer, you're going to be able to take that time that you capture back from the simplicity that hyper-converged infrastructure gives you, and you're going to be able to reinvest that into other higher value areas of your organization, such as DevOps, such as automation or better security practices. And I think that's why hyper-converged is such a foundation to those organizations that are looking to transform and streamline how they deliver IT services. And just to kind of share some of the building blocks that we embraced when we took on this concept to be more agile within our organization. The first was, right, as I just kind of talked about, was, right, this private cloud. The foundation that for us was the move away from three-tier architecture to embrace hyper-converged. We chose Nutanix specifically. It seemed to be the right fit for our particular need, but there are other options out there. But for us, that was the right value. And then over time, we did actually evolve from like a VMware hypervisor to an Acropolis hypervisor in certain areas. For example, our SIM environment, which was a large Splunk implementation, we were able to, because we didn't need a lot of advanced capabilities of a hypervisor, we were able to really avoid a lot of licensing costs there and run all of the hosts and VMs to support the SIM environment on Acropolis Hypervisor. It was a great way for us to introduce Acropolis Hypervisor in a safe manner for the teams and engineering staff to get used to the new paradigm, and it gave us back a lot of cost savings from not having to invest in the licensing. The other part I want to spend some time on is automation engine, right? So once you simplify your infrastructure, you're able to do more seamless upgrades and more timely upgrades and reduce your technical debt in your core infrastructure, you then can start to think about, that DevOps offering, because at the same time we were working on streamlining how we delivered infrastructure services, the development and engine and architecture team were coming at us with DevOps, right? With continuous deployments, pipelines, more agile development best practices. And as a result of that, we needed to get infrastructure in their hands quicker. Because what happened, if you have any experience with DevOps and CI/CD pipeline, what you realize quickly when you're running multiple sprint teams to develop new capabilities is the growth and sprawl of a dev test non-prod systems. Traditionally, we would have maybe a dev environment, a task QA environment, perhaps a performance and testing environment, and then production. But when we introduced agile development and specifically the whole DevOps CI/CD components, what we saw, and then we ran parallel sprint teams, is that number tripled for us, right? We would have 3 to 5 dev environments to support an application. Usually there would be 3 QAs to support different top pipelines, and then we could consolidate that into probably 2 stage environments, one for performance testing, one for hotfix testing, and then finally production, right? So what happened for us is it became very difficult for infrastructure to accommodate the numbers of virtual machines and everything that needed to support this new agile development. So we had to introduce automation, right? We had to automate how the teams delivered the operating system, how they delivered the middleware technologies, whether it be a web server, whether it be a Java, a JVM environment, or whatever. And so what we did is we embraced for us, we embraced Ansible. The value of Ansible for us was that it was agentless, so we didn't have to have the technical overhead or the lifecycle management overhead of constantly updating agents. In addition, and so what we did, the practical approach we took to that level of automation was, the OS team, we said, do what you do well to take that golden image virtual machine and make it into a hardened Linux box or Windows box, for example, to be able to then hand off to the middleware team to then make it into a web server or database server. So we asked them to do that. Then we went to the middleware team, for example, and we said, you go into Ansible, you build the playbooks. Ansible's, Chef is recipes, Ansible's playbooks. It's kind of the sequence of events you take to build a server. And we said, do what you need to do to build an Nginx server or an Apache server or a WebLogic server. Don't worry about what the OS team is doing so much, but just focus on your area. And so we we did it in a very systematic approach that way because everybody was getting used to this new paradigm, right? Where we were now asking them to, instead of going out and do all the manual things you do on a virtual machine, to now take that intellect, convert it into basically a playbook, an automated fashion, so that other people can then execute it. And we had to bring the team through this new mindset, right? You know, the senior engineers, they were used to kind of just getting in on the boxes, doing what they needed to do and get off. But it didn't scale for us. That was the big challenge we had, is it couldn't scale. And so by having them take that knowledge and that expertise and to put it into an automation engine like Ansible, we were then able to take a generic virtual machine, which VRA would give us, VMware's automation would give us. And then we were able to customize it with Ansible playbooks that should turn it into, you know, a Red Hat, put the right version of SSH, for example, or put the Splunk security agent on it, or whatever components we needed to harden that box and make it compliant with our, whether it be with HIPAA or SOX compliant. We did all that through Ansible. And the reason why we did it there versus why not build blueprints in like VRA or vCloud? The reason why we chose that is we wanted it to be modular. And the second part is we wanted like greater lifecycle management. So for example, if we needed to push out a new, I don't know, it's a SSH daemon or Splunk forwarder agent or whatever other agents may be running on the boxes, we could go into the Ansible playbook, we could update it once, all new virtual machines got the new version, and then we could also retrofit all the existing VMs that were already in existence. And we just felt like while VRA was great for us to get that day one machine out, it wasn't very good on day 600 of managing that. And we just, so leveraging a tool like an Ansible allowed us to have a full spectrum of manageability of that life of that machine. And so that was a major change for us. Once we achieved these two blocks alone, we saw a tremendous shift in our agility, in our ability to keep pace with the demands on infrastructure and make sure it passed security compliance every time. Because, you know, I was always frustrated as a leader, you know, because I knew how hard my engineers worked to manage the virtual machines and make sure they were secure, to make sure they were patched, to make sure, you know, all the right password protections were in place. And then, you know, you go through a security audit and you find they find that one server that was, I don't know, not open to root or did not have the right password configuration on it, right? And you get dinged on the audit, and next thing you know, your CISO or whoever is asking you, and they question, you know, that your teams are doing a good job. And I always felt the value of technology like Ansible was it helped them be great at their job, right? It helped engineers do what they do and do it really well, and protect it, in some regards, protected them from when in the middle of the night they're working on a problem to try to get a system back up, and maybe they leave root enabled on. Well, with technology like Ansible and playbooks that are checking that and making sure those settings aren't, I can always ensure that you know, my system was returned to the proper state. And it gave us a level of confidence, and it also definitely helped us with our compliance and audit. So that's why we went that approach outside of doing everything inside of vCloud. And we felt like over time that if Ansible was no longer the right approach for us, we could swap that component out without tearing down the entire private cloud, because we had experience with that, right? We had kind of gone all in with one vendor, starts with a V, and we were successful, right? We had it integrated in the ServiceNow. You could go in and click a ticket, provision a VM. Once it got approved, out would come a VM. The problem was we could never upgrade it. It was so tightly coupled and so customized to achieve that outcome that we lost all elasticity. And so we actually had to build an entirely new cloud ecosystem and kind of just preserve that other one until we can migrate the machines onto the new platform. So that's something to take into consideration when you're looking at your automation engine and your integration with other areas. You need to take an API first approach and be very careful about how tightly coupled you have that. And then this is where we tied into the higher value upstream areas, right? We used IBM Urban Code Deploy to kind of manage our continuous deployment of code into our machines. We also, had Bamboo for building configurations and whatnot. But the whole concept here is whichever path is best for you, you want to think about, what if this isn't the right solution and I need to replace a component or something? I don't want to have to tear it all down to do that. So that was a big part of our philosophy going in. So to realize the value, right? It's more than technology, right? Too many times we bring in new innovative technology like hyper-converged infrastructure, like VRA automation or whatever, and we don't really look at how we do processes and how our people are using the tech. And I think with today's dramatic shift in this software-defined data center in the cloud environment we now find ourselves in, you have to look at all three and be willing to make changes in all three areas to truly get the what I would call monumental changes that are possible. So when you're looking to realize the value, right? For us, we prioritize driving out the bottlenecks. So, going back to those manual processes I talked about earlier, one of the biggest hurdles we had of delivering just a simple virtual machine was getting the IP and the DNS, right? And it was interesting, as large of an organization as we were, that it was an email request to somebody. They would then pick it up eventually and give us back an IP, and then we take that IP and reach out to the DNS people and say, hey, we need a DNS entry for this IP. And that would add a week or two because the IP person was part-time that gave out the IP. So it's just, but nobody wanted to really speak up about that, right? Because you don't want to throw your friends under the bus, your fellow engineers, but as a leader, you kind of have to get in there and ask why, and keep asking why, and keep digging a little deeper. Why does it take 3 weeks to get that VM in the hands of the middleware team? Or why does it take 5 weeks to get it all the way over to the project team so they can start installing the app, right? And you come to find out it's little things like, well, we have all this manual process for an IP, or DNS, we're not allowed to integrate DNS entry into our, have VMware do it, for an example. And then you just have to make some decisions, right? You have to choose to drive out that inefficiency and be willing to lead that change. And so that was huge gains just in those simple areas. We experienced huge gains. And then just having that philosophy of automated actions. When we first embraced Ansible, there was some nervousness, there was some reservation on the part of the engineers, right there. But once they got into it and realized how great it was and how much it freed their time to do other areas, like think about new technology, like maybe not have to work the weekend for all their changes, they embraced it. And it was great to see them overcome that, and just to see the momentum take over and see what they could start doing with it. Again, you got to be focused on streamlining your process. You got to get into the details, right? You can't. You just have to keep digging, and you'll find the problem, right? And sometimes it's people, and sometimes it's process, right? And you got to be willing to handle that. We did go to a reference architecture driven, right? We wanted, we designed a top of rack switch all the way down through our hyper-converged infrastructure. We said, per 42U, we got as specific as per 42U rack with hyper-converged infrastructure, we can handle 500 VMs based on the density we're comfortable with. So that was transformational for the footprint in our data center when we embraced it. How we were able to, consolidate VMAXs and whatnot down to, for multi-cabinets down to half a cabinet of hyper-converged. And then the other thing was clear accountability, right? And for us, what that meant, what the big organization change we made was that we said one team owns it. And what I mean by that is we put a single team, single accountability entire from everything from that top of rack stack. They owned the hardware, they owned the hypervisor, they owned the hyper-converged infrastructure. They were accountable for everything to delivering that virtual machine into the hands of the OS team, which then applied Ansible to it. So when we did that, right, it was no longer a finger-pointing exercise on why we couldn't get an IP or DNS or why we couldn't do maintenance, right? We empowered a team, and that team, surprised us, right? Surprised us in how excited they were to now have full account. I no longer have to put tickets in and get storage assigned to my VMware cluster. I no longer have to do this. I can kind of own this ecosystem and deliver really a product. And for us, I always talk to them about think like a product manager, right? I didn't want them to think about the enterprise private cloud as vSphere 6.0 or Nutanix 5.0 or Cisco Nexus 9300. I wanted them to think about it as we deliver enterprise private cloud 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. And every release, every quarter, every semi-annually, we're adding new functionality, new capability, and we're advertising that this is our new offering. We've expanded what we can do. And that was a huge mindset shift that was fundamental. When they grasped that idea that we provide a solution just like a product owner provides a solution, and to stop thinking about individual components but think about the value of the whole, that was transformational for the team, and it gave them really a sense of pride for what they were doing and how they were delivering it. And again, I think one of the mistakes that people get into when they want to embrace this is they think about, hey, at the end of the day, I want an easy button on my desk and I just push it and out comes my infrastructure. Well, that may be the vision. That's not where you're going to begin your execution. Your execution is going to be much more smaller, much more tactical, and more important to then finally, over time, building towards that easy button. But I've seen a lot of private cloud initiatives where they kind of just keep throwing all these requirements in the beginning, and they get so wrapped around the axle that they really can't deliver value because they keep getting hung up. And so I think the key here is to find out what, when you think about your minimum viable product, when you think about what am I going to do the next quarter that's going to make a difference, and you take that very small bites of your journey here, you'll find that over a fairly quick amount of time, you've accomplished way more than you thought you could have with that approach. So for us, what were the gains? What did we realize? For us, there was an 80% reduction. It's actually higher than that, but I struggled to say higher than 80, but it was so significant. I remember the CIO coming to me and saying, PMs are telling me it takes 5 weeks to get servers. Why is that, right? I need you to go fix that. And we did fix that. We got it down to minutes. We had one emergency release cycle that required us to rebuild an important part of our revenue cycle management system. They did that within 3 days. It was 35 servers. They did it in 3 days, rebuilt every one of them. perfectly through automation and through all the investments we had made up front to deliver our private cloud, and it was great. So we also achieved, we were a very large organization. I know some of you are not this large, but to grasp the scale, we had about 9,000 servers under management, and we had 9 engineers managing those 9,000. Again, that's from the VM down. All the hardware, all the configuration, all the hyperconverged, they managed it all. They weren't overwhelmed because of the capabilities of the hyperconverged, you know, the simplicity, able to do lifecycle management. We were able to take advantage of when new functionality came out. We were able to put it in an appropriate manner and realize those benefits. And then again, we were able to, because we had consolidated like we had, the goal was 80. We achieved it in some areas and some we didn't. And you know, you got to pick what metric are you measuring when you say 80%. Is it storage? Is it memory? Is it CPU consumption? Usually it's one of those three. For us, it was memory. We were, you know, had a lot of Java, had a lot of memory intensive apps. So usually we would base our utilization more closely off memory, and then second was off storage. Usually we typically had in most applications plenty of CPU cycles in whatever we did. And then that helped us know that we needed to prioritize storage and memory over CPUs and cores, right? We had the insights into how the cloud was running, and so we knew, and so we adjusted how we bought and what model we bought to kind of make sure that we were optimum based on our needs. Again, by simplifying the downtime, you know, it was transformational. That we had this one SQL server. They came to us and said they're having performance problems. The business unit was upset. They were falling behind. It was the billing department, and we couldn't figure it out. Right? We couldn't figure it out if it was in the storage layer or if it was in the OS layer or somewhere in between. And so what we did is we took that server and we moved it onto a hyper-converged box. This was before we went all in hyper-converged. So we replicated the VM overnight. It was a Friday. We got on the phone Saturday morning. And the goal was to figure out, is it in the OS up, or is it below the OS somewhere in the backbone of the infrastructure that's causing our performance problem? That was the whole purpose. When we did that, everybody got on a call. DBA is like, wow, everything's working fine. And the business unit is like, yeah, all my queries are running great. If anything, things are running faster than they were before, right? And come to find out, that particular app, we had the wrong ESXi drivers. We had upgraded it was Cisco UCS chassis. We'd upgraded to new blades, and we needed a different ESXi driver, and we were throwing SCSI errors on the ESXi host. But we didn't see that, right? We've been looking for days to try to figure it out, and we hadn't seen that. And by going to a hyper-converged platform, we drove out a lot of that complexity and dependencies, and which greatly improved our uptime. And again, I mean, once we kind of started building the hyper-converged infrastructure and doing more of our manual work in an automated fashion, the team was able to spend more and more time on higher value objectives. And for example, I mean, like I said, it took a life of its own. They got to the point where, you know, once you provision a VM and then sometimes down the road you need to add storage, well, you'd have to go make a storage. You have to go make a request to the VMware guys to allocate storage, etc. They automated all that, right? It got to the point where they were like, look, we're comfortable with automation, we're comfortable, and if you would go through a workflow and if you needed like 50 gig added to your VM, once it got approved, they would automatically add it to an existing VM. You get an email. We obviously had all our change control tied into all that as well. But it was great to see that the team really embraced it. And what that did is it freed up capacity to support unplanned projects. And what I mean by that, right? If you look about that 80% target utilization, we got very efficient because, you know, the storage array wasn't trying to have a buffer so they don't run out of space, and the CPU guys were trying to make sure they had enough ESXi host capacity, so they were hoarding space, right? But once we put it all under a single pane of glass, and once we had end-to-end accountability in a modular way to expand it without having to buy new arrays or make major investments, we found out we had much more capacity than we anticipated, and then we could handle unplanned projects more seamlessly without constantly going back saying, I can't do it unless you give me a bunch of money to go buy more infrastructure. So that was another side benefit of our journey and what came out of it. Again, it was a complete shift to a value center mindset, right? It was this idea that we're here to enable the business, we're here to provide a product, and we're part of the business outcome. No longer are we a separate entity of the organization, a back-end entity. So for us, just kind of want to highlight some of the best practices, right? You want to kind of avoid lock-in. We all experience it to some level, right? We make decisions, we make investments, but all I'm saying there is that you don't know what the future holds, and we know technology is changing pretty rapidly now, and so we need the ability to swap in and out components without having to tear it all down. And API-driven services, that's key for that modularity, right? When we integrated the Ansible into VMware, right, we made a decision that we're going to make the API calls. The team wasn't familiar with that. It was something new. They had to learn and figure out. But by keeping that philosophy, we avoided the custom scripting that really made it hard to do lifecycle management, and that only grew over time. We didn't do that everywhere in the beginning, but as the team got more comfortable, we started demanding it more and more. And the whole idea was that we needed to introduce change without disruption, right? We needed to be able to manage the cloud without having the applications go down while we do it. And we achieved that goal, right? Through the technology, through Hyper-convergence, through our automation, and better having that single pane of glass and be able to manage capacity appropriately. We had agility to move workloads around, to do proactive maintenance, and because we were more API driven now, we could make changes with less disruption for us. We did take some of our Ansible scripts, and we also had a public cloud component to what we delivered. We just had some use cases where public cloud made a lot of sense. It was customer facing, it was mobile app development, right? But we were able to take some of the learnings of our on-prem and some of the capabilities of Ansible and then apply it over there to the public cloud. But again, I think the thing is to see cloud, public and private cloud as complementary, and that to see them as we're going to need both in the future, and not exclusive one or the other. And again, for us, consolidating accountability and reducing silos had a huge impact, and that could be the hard part of all of this, but that's where the true value is working through that overhead and finding a better way, redefining your engineers to be cloud engineers or infrastructure engineers or whatever, and kind of making them more broadly capable, I think is huge, and making them all accountable for the success, I think is also huge, versus their individual area. So I know I've spoken for a little bit here. I do want to have time for questions, and that's the highlight of my journey in enterprise cloud and how we achieved it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alton. I really appreciate you spending some time to talk with us about this. We did have a couple questions that came through. First one specifically wanted to know if this webinar was being recorded, and yes, it is being recorded, and we will send out the recording of this webinar probably via a link to YouTube first thing tomorrow morning. And then also, a question for you, Alton, was around, did you look at alternative HCI solutions?
Yeah, so we did. We did. We looked at VMware's VxRail at the time. We also, looked at HyperFlex as well. We just felt like we had one, it was the most mature, and at the time, which again, this was a few years ago when we really went all in. We felt like it had the most mature offering and the greatest flexibility, especially at the hypervisor level. But yes, we did consider multiple.
Great. And then finally, looks like what were some of the challenges with getting your team to sort of embrace automation?
Yeah, I think for us there was definitely some nervousness with the team. They were there's always a little bit of inertia within the organization when you bring in new change like this, and I think the key there was you really had to get in and get intimate with the engineers and really spend a lot of time whiteboarding and walking through the expectations and letting them vent their concerns and frustrations, and then trying to find the success. I think anytime you introduce new technology, it's important to find a win early in the process, right? Because you're looking for ways to build momentum for them to see the value instead of just being frustrated. So we did that through training. We did that also. We had an engagement with a consultant for a few weeks to kind of get us on sport, get us thinking DevOps, get us thinking source control, get us to think about from a developer's viewpoint on how to do this correctly. And then the team started building momentum. Then what happened at the 6-month mark, almost exactly, I remember them coming back and saying, look, we've been using the product for 6 months. Here's what we've learned, and we kind of want to do a do-over and apply these new these best practices and lessons learned. And that was great to see because it kind of had started taking a life of its own as a result of that. But it definitely takes some leadership in the beginning. And it takes a commitment to work through the obstacles that you encounter.
Great. Thanks, Alton.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so it looks like that's all the questions we have this afternoon. Just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we'll be sure to send over the recorded version of the webinar probably sometime early tomorrow morning. You see that in your inbox. If you think of any questions later, feel free to reach out to us and send us a note. You can respond to the email that will send you the recording tomorrow morning. We'll be happy to answer those and get you in touch with Alton and some of our other eGroup experts that have some experience in this field. Thank you again for your time today, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future.
Thank you.